Okay, my name is Jim Weinstein. I was in the United States Marine Corps, and I served as a combat engineer. As a youngster, as a child, or tween, I was, my dad was, pretty intense, and I was troubled. I should tell you about my growing up was kind of traumatic because my father, I learned later, working on my own PTSD, that he had it from World War II pretty bad. And so that explained a lot. But he would never talk with me. So I gave up after a while. I didn't really care about school through the junior high years, but as I got to high school, I realized I needed to get my act together, and I became a much better student. I was freshman, sophomore, junior year. I was doing pretty well, and I focused on school. Went to Evanston Township High School in a class of 1,025. I was ranked 123rd. But I didn't graduate that way because senior year, things really got bad. I was doing drugs and alcohol. And so I graduated 944, which I'm kind of not proud of, but I tell people that use me as a role model, not. I played a lot of sports. I loved soccer. First team All-State as a keeper for Evanston, 2 goals against. So I was kind of proud of that. So I was still doing too much partying when I lost 2 scholarships because of my senior grades. So I said, maybe you should figure out who you are. But I still did a lot of partying at Roosevelt University. And after the second semester, they said, well, maybe you should come back when you're more serious in 1966. So I knew I was going to get drafted. So I said, I need to find out who I really am. So I joined the Marine Corps. And it's kind of interesting. When I left for boot camp in September, about 2 weeks into boot camp, I got my draft notice for the Army. They didn't think that was too funny. In fact, Master Gunnery Sergeant Troutman, he calls me from formation, and he puts this thing right up against my face. You want to be in the Army? I said, no, sir. So I stayed in the Corps. And I tell people that the Corps really saved my life. I first started out because I was an embarkation NCO, and that was boring as heck. And I got all the other senior NCOs were giving me all their work to do. So I went to the colonel. I said, I can't do this. I need to do something that I think is more worthwhile instead of doing everybody else's work. So I started on convoy duty, manning a 50 caliber machine gun. We were taking bridging materials and all kinds of supplies all over. We went as far south as Chulai and Hill 37, which was with the 26th Marines. And I was, the engineers said, well, you're loafing on the truck. Come on down here. We'll show you what to do. So actually, you'd call it on-the-job training. I became a combat engineer, and that's what I'm most proud of as a combat engineer. 7th Engineer Battalion, and they were already there when I got there, and they came in 1966 and served to 72. As a battalion, we lost 125 Marines and 3 corpsmen over 6 years. The bad guys liked to pick us off so that we couldn't build our bridges. So Vietnam was horrifying, but by the time you get there, you're conditioned and you don't flinch because they taught you about that. I lost a lot of good friends, and I was there 3 times. First one was in 1967 and 68, and that was the worst tour. I did some tunnel work when I was there, and that was pretty scary stuff. But when we found tunnels, and the grunts would say, not it, and they saw, well, we got an engineer. And I went over there, sure, I'll do it. And we crawled into the tunnel with a 45 and a flashlight. We learned real quick, don't hold the flashlight in front of you, hold it over here. So they were shooting at the flashlight. And a couple times I had to return fire. It was scary stuff, but...
What was your goal in going into the tunnel?
Surviving.
But...
finding what was down there. Finding if anyone was down there. And we found a lot of explosives and a lot of weapons. I found a couple really huge areas that were obviously hospitals, and there was a lot of bandages and gore. But you steel yourself for that. And I came home with some really whopper
Yeah.
daydreams, but nightmares. I was supposed to rotate back from my first tour in January of '68, but no, excuse me, late February '68. But I was, off duty, maybe drinking a little too much beer. And the gunny said, I can't send you back like this. I'm going to send you to a place called Quezon with a bunch of supplies and, that they need for your platoon, or it was a platoon that was up at Quezon with the 1st Engineers. Well, the day I landed, as I was headed to a bunker, a mortar round hit the chopper I came in on, and I was there for the siege because that was the start of the siege. So 75 days later, the 82nd Airborne came up Route 1 and pulled us out.
So what siege are you talking about?
The siege of Quezon, Tet Offensive of '68.
Can
Tet Offensive in the past had been sort of a ceasefire because they were celebrating the New Year, but not this time. And what turned out was a plan that was in place, I'm sure, long before it started, but we were at Quezon, which was northwest of the city of Hue, and we did a lot of stuff on interdiction of the supplies coming down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And when we knew about what was going to happen was we had another outpost on a hill called 881. It was about 3/4 of a mile away from us. It was more of a higher area. We were on a plateau, not quite as high. And when they started getting rocketed and overrun, we knew we were next. And after the chopper was blown up, things started pretty quickly after that, and we were receiving probably 80 either rocket rounds or artillery rounds an hour. And we were living pretty much in trenches like World War II. And it was, I admit, I was scared. But if you ran into another Marine and said he wasn't scared, he was lying to you. So we did what we were trained. We went back to our training, which was pretty intense. And thank God for the training. And that's where I say the Marines saved my life. We had a couple times when they actually got to the wire. I'm not aware of them breaching the wire, but we had a couple. They had a tank up there and something called an Ontos, which is six tubes of a 106 recoilless rifle. And they had them enfilade, so they were facing directly down the hill. So we stopped a lot of that stuff. There were a lot of B-52 strikes. They called them arc light missions. And you didn't know about them till the night sky started, lifting you off the ground. It was earth-shattering. And I credit that as well as the artillery for my tinnitus. And, probably the rock concerts I went to before that were contributed to it. I was sort of a wild child, as I told you. And so when they lifted the siege, the 82nd Airborne, I wanted to kiss every one of them, but I just shook their hand, gave them a big hug, and thanked them. Because I didn't think it was appropriate for a jarhead to be given an Army guy. We call them doggies, but yeah, not to their face. And they knew we were appreciative. Well, when I got back to 7th Engineers, because I was there over my rotation date, a lot of the people I knew had rotated. And they didn't know who I was because all my records were sent to Graves and Registration because they thought I was dead. Before I went to Quezon, we'd had a lot of rocket attacks, and I had a lot of shrapnel in my back. So they took me down to China Beach. There was a television program about that. And they x-rayed me, and I put my dog tags down. Well, I walked out of there without my dog tags. So when I got back to 7th Engineers, they had to remake a set of dog tags, but they didn't know who I was because they thought I'd been sent home. In the meantime, my family had been notified that I was KIA, and they were waiting for my body to come back. And unfortunately, at China Beach, they'd taken my dog tags and put them with another KIA with no dog tags. They didn't know who he was. So they notified my family. I got home. My family was shocked. I got to California. I called them. I said, I'm coming home. And I said, we don't know who this is, but Jim's dead. Don't call again. So I called him back. I said, well, I'm going to be on a flight from Los Angeles to DF. Yeah, they had a big airport. I can't think right now. To O'Hare. And I got off the plane, and I was about 40 pounds. I went there, I weighed 170 pounds. I came home, I was a lot lighter because I had malaria and pneumonia at the same time. But, still walking, wounded, and carrying out my duties. And so I came home with the typical, really nice suntan for about here with my cover. And there's a white strip, and then, the tuft of hair on top, the typical Marine Corps buzz cut. And that kind of shocked them. They didn't know who I was because we weren't allowed to wear uniforms. So I came home in civilian clothes because of the threat of the protesters doing terrible things that we'd heard about to other military that had come home. And so I was in civilian clothes, and they didn't know who I was till I walked up to them and spoke to them. They were shocked. And it was kind of interesting. My father was grudgingly had to send back the $10,000 they've gotten because I was dead. But, he lightened up. But he was still the angry man he was. And I realized after I was working on my own PTSD that he was in World War II, and he was a tech sergeant, and he was squad leader, and he spent a lot of time in the middle of a lot of Germans who wanted to not let him live. And he got trapped on the wrong side of a place called the Remagen Bridge when it collapsed. And he was on the wrong side of the road. And apparently there was some journalist who came up to him and said, hey, you know where we are? He said, yeah, what are you doing here? It was a journalist from the Chicago area, apparently. And he said, well, I'll try to let your family know. But it was pretty heavy duty, and he was always pretty angry, and he had a flash temper. And I heard some of that from my dad. And when we got home, and I was able to talk with him, he didn't want to talk about it. And I tried to share with him, before I got help, I sought help, that he was like me. We just didn't want to. We wanted to leave it behind. I didn't cry for 50 years.
When was the last time you cried? When was the first time you cried after 50 years?
When I hit the ground at El Toro and kissed the ground and every other Marine that I saw, and that's when I just broke down. But I stifled that pretty quick. I told you it's 50 years before I could cry. And Dr. Panich, when I start crying, I say, "Damn you, Dr. Panich." But I was happy because I was a changed person, and I got in touch with my feelings. And I was in love with this beautiful woman who took me back in her life. Yeah, what a blessing. And then in 2017, she read a newspaper. She was reading incessantly on readings. And she read the Tribune, I guess, and she found out that there was this thing called Honor Flight, and they were taking Vietnam veterans' names. So I signed up in 2017. And I think I was supposed to fly in 19, but the pandemic was there and nothing was going on. And I flew in October of 2021. And that's the first welcome back I had, that I really had a welcome back. And it was when I first was thanked for my service, I wanted to run away. I was just, I didn't know how to handle it. So I got involved with Honor Flight and with the Education Committee, and my life has changed completely. I still cry. The VA gives me some really good stuff. They just usually say something else. And it's helped me with my nightmares a lot. And I was getting help with this group, and we're like brothers.
Does it be able to cry?
Yes.